Okay, today we're going to talk about the Venerable Bishop Fulton Sheen. He was born Peter John Sheen on May 8th, 1895 in El Paso, Illinois. He was the oldest of four sons from Newton and Delia Sheen. He was ordained in the Diocese of Peoria in 1919 and appointed auxiliary bishop of the Diocese of New York in 1951. He was made the bishop, or installed as the bishop of Rochester from 1966 to 1969. What's cool about our modern saints is you get photographs of them, right? Better than paintings. Interesting enough, his father enrolled him in school as Fulton Sheen. That's how he got the name Fulton Sheen. Very well educated. He graduated high school valedictorian in 1913 at what was called the Spalding Institute in Peoria. He attended St. Viator College in Bourbonnais, Illinois. Sounds like a French name. He went to St. Paul Seminary in Minnesota and ordained on September 19th, 1919. He had further studies at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He earned a doctorate in philosophy in 1923 at Catholic University in Leuven in Belgium. He earned the Sacred Theology degree at the Pontificum Collegium Internationale Angelicum in Rome, which was the future Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas Angelicum. So a well-educated man, understandably. He was made the assistant pastor at St. Patrick's Church in Soho Square in London afterwards, and he returned to the U.S. as pastor of St. Patrick's in Peoria, Illinois. After 9 months, the Peoria Bishop Edmund Dunn returned Father Sheen to the Catholic University of America to teach philosophy, where he taught until 1950. He was consecrated bishop again in 1951 and served in the Archdiocese of New York until 1966. And in 1966, he became the ordinary bishop in Rochester, New York, until he retired in 1969. Afterwards, he was appointed the Archbishop of titular See of Newport, which is Wales, which is the titular archbishop is one who's just basically, it's more of an honorary title. He's not in charge of any particular diocese. Noted intellectual, wrote over 73 books. I've read 2 of them. One title caught my eye there. I don't know if Father John can relate to this, but hearing nuns' confessions is like being stoned to death with popcorn. And I'm sure he can't comment because he's got to, uphold the vow of confession. So I've read the one, Peace of Soul, and another one I've read here, Bishop Sheen, Mentor and Friend. And I brought the book here today. I'll let anyone who's interested in borrowing this, you're welcome to take it and read it, but that's where I drew a lot of my material from. He began a weekly Sunday night broadcast called The Catholic Hour in 1930. He had acquired over 4 million listeners after 2 decades of broadcast. He received approximately 3,000 to 6,000 letters weekly from listeners. Interestingly enough, during this time, he conducted the first religious service broadcast on the new medium of the time, television, putting in motion a new avenue of his religious pursuits. I think he was a man ahead of his time. He began a series entitled Life is Worth Living that ran from 1951 to 1957, and he was assigned at that time what was called the graveyard slot on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. I don't know if they even still have a graveyard slot. He was not expected to challenge ratings of Milton Berle and Frank Sinatra. He jumped from 3 to 15 stations in 2 months, and fan mail started to flow in at rates of about 8,500 letters per week. In 1952, he won an Emmy Award. Time called him the first televangelist, and he eventually attracted up to 30 million viewers weekly. So, interestingly enough, so when he won his Emmy Award, he attributed it to his 4 writers, which he termed Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So I think most people know Bishop Fulton Sheen for his television work, but I think what really made the man was his life outside of what was on television. He became the director of the Society for the Propagation of the Faith from 1958 to 66. He hosted a syndicated series, the Fulton Sheen program, from 1961 to 68 with the same format as Life is Worth Living. The reason for the change from one program to another was because the network became defunct. It was called Dumont. And so he essentially kept the same program with the same format. So I thought this was interesting, considering who Fulton Sheen is and who else was on TV. I don't know if there's 2 famous personalities there. And does anyone recognize the one on the right? Okay. Yeah. They sort of got the same wry smile. I thought that was just kind of fascinating. That just struck me. His television audience was 40% Catholic, 30% Protestant, and 30% Jewish. I thought that was kind of fascinating. 60% of his letters were from non-Catholics. He had a staff of 60 people reading letters, and he always answered every single letter that came into the station, not necessarily by him, but at least by somebody on his staff. So it's something he took seriously. He took in approximately $18 million of donations a year, which were subsequently given to support mission activities. So a lot of that money went to the Society of the Propagation of the Faith. Father Franco, during his formation, was well versed in Latin. He had a doctorate in Latin. He was well versed in the history of the church and theological studies. So that caught Bishop Sheen's attention, and so he hired the young priest part-time for a while, and eventually hired him full-time. Finally persuaded his bishop, I guess it was real, in 1962, and he eventually wrote the biography of Bishop Sheen, mentor and friend. So Father Franco decided to make a good first impression by getting up at 6:30 and discovered that Bishop Sheen was already up at 5:30. And his meditations began at 5:30. They did Holy Hour after that, and then celebrated Mass after that. Daily trips to the office, which was normally a 10-minute walk, took 1 hour due to people wanting to talk with Bishop Sheen. That's the sort of the price you have to pay for notoriety. That actually makes me appreciate that I'm just an ordinary Joe in the background, and I definitely appreciate my anonymity. I have no desire to be famous. So, at 3 p.m., coffee break consisted of the rosary and a short homily, and work recommences after dinner until about 10 p.m., so he had a very busy day. And I just can't imagine that, just the interior drive and motivation he had. It's astounding. Notable conversions. I don't know if anyone recognize these names, but writer Haywood Brown, politician Claire Booth Lucet, who's a socialist, automaker Henry Ford II, which I think is interesting, a communist writer Louise Boudens, theatrical designer Joe Meltzer, violinist and composer Fritz Kressler, and actress Virginia Mayo. Each conversion process took an average of 25 hours of lessons, and reportedly more than 90% of his students in private instruction were baptized. You know, one notable thing about Fulton Sheen is he really didn't distinguish between the popular and the regular person. He treated all people the same with dignity, and that's one thing a lot of people probably aren't aware of about Bishop Sheen. So he was noted for taking time to catechize all of his new converts, regardless of whether they were famous or not. So a little bit about the Society for the Propagation of the Faith. It was an organization originally founded by Pauline Géricault in 1822 in France. I used to read stories to my kids about that. The U.S. organization, led by Bishop Sheen from 1958 to 1966, he edited Mission Magazine, took it from what was a big magazine to a little pamphlet so that people could read it on subways and buses and things. He oversaw funds of the faith. So he received and evaluated funds for the society, took very seriously his responsibility, often pressured and resisted diverting funds to pet causes. And raising money for missions and charitable works, he stated, is easier when you don't act like a beggar. And so his mantra was, you just need to explain the good that can be accomplished. There was a noted conflict between him and Cardinal Spellman, who was Bishop Sheen's superior. So Bishop Sheen would not relent to requests from Cardinal Spellman to earmark funds to projects that Cardinal Spellman favored. So there was a source of tension there. Bishop Sheen was meticulous in investigating and having an unbiased evaluations of real needs, and would not compromise. He embraced the ecumenical movement. He often browsed bookstores after dinner. He had just an insatiable appetite for learning. He looked for books on psychology, philosophy, and theology. He noted that Protestant scholars tended to be more well-versed in scriptures and theology than their Catholic counterparts, which I can relate to that because I think I've stated before that I originally come from a Protestant background, and being in an active Protestant church, it was just a constant devotion and study of the scriptures to really understand your faith, which is nice to bring into the Catholic faith. He used to go visit Jackie Gleason at his birthday. Jackie and Martin Sheen sort of had a back and forth thing, sort of helping each other out. Jackie Gleason always advocated his work in charity. And Jackie Gleason experienced many broken relationships with fame, and Bishop Sheen used to console him. One of the things he stated was, the publicity you garner, he says, is inevitably used for good or for evil. Being a good role model is no harder than being good to yourself. So I don't know whatever know the state of Jackie Gleason's soul, but hopefully he had influence on him to bring him to heaven. I was could think of his one-liners from Jackie Gleason and just twisting them. It's like, one of these days, Alice, pow, God's going to get you in the heart. To heaven, Alice, to heaven. I hope he makes it. Some good entertainers up there. Bishop Sheen traveled the world in support of missionaries. He was really very active in promoting missionaries around the world. One time he visited a leper colony in Thailand, and Father Franco was with them, and they were repulsed by the appearance of the disfigured lepers, and one in particular, a man with no fingers. Bishop Sheen gave him a rosary and held his hands, cusped his hands, and said, "Pray the rosary." He wasn't afraid. The man smiled, and the revulsion just disappeared, and they can see the face of Christ shine through as the Bishop Sheen described. He was a man who just really loved people. He just had an amazing gift to see beyond the surface of individuals and see Christ shine in almost every person he met. And I think that's one of the more amazing things about him. Hope I can emulate that part of him. He was very outspoken on the evils of communism, which was prevalent during the day. He deplored it. He came up with a term called wet martyrs and dry martyrs. Traditionally, wet martyrs would shed their blood quickly and be done. Dry martyrs would suffer torture over long periods of time, and their lives became a testament to the faith, the living faith. He suggested that Christians under communism are dry martyrs, and he also noted in the West we have Christ without the cross, and in the East they have the cross that is suffering without Christ. He hated communism. He said, hate communism, but love the communists. Communism is basically man's egotism at its worst, which lines up with a lot of probably teachings of Sigmund Freud, which he also was outspoken against his psychology, which was very atheistic. It is men who are made in God's image who exclude God from society. It's kind of striking me ironic. Does this sound like what's happening in the U.S. today, like sort of excluding God from society? Communism's tenet denies the God-given right of all men and women to own and enjoy the goods of the earth. But in the end, the whole world will see how ridiculous it is, and it will collapse. He stated quite clearly that God will triumph in this part of the world, and how prophetic. Hopefully, maybe that gives us hope for the U.S. Bishop Sheen foresaw the day when the East will have all of Christ before the West because of all the suffering they have experienced, So, is there a possibility that the West may have to experience this for us to come around? 1 week prior to Stalin's death, Bishop Sheen stated on one of his shows, "Stalin cannot continue, that time is up for him." And that was interesting, very prophetic, that he made that statement 1 week before he died. Stalin, that is, died. Bishop Sheen also stated that we would most likely see communism fall in our lifetime. I think of today, what we experience in this country, and I think, well, how about hate liberalism and love the liberal? Maybe that could be the mantra of our time. He also participated in the Second Vatican Council, He was peripherally participated in the first two sessions, but more actively in the third session. Pope Paul opened the council with each day with Mass, and Father Franco translated many of the Latin documents for Bishop Sheen, and that's where he helped out considerably. While there, he met a bishop from Krakow, Poland, and found him quite fascinating, Karol Wojtyla. They both shared a mutual love of missionary work and a hatred for communism. He influenced the missionary session of the council. During Vatican II, by the way, Mary was pronounced by the Pope the Mother of the Church. He also stated that it was his wish to die on or near a feast of the Blessed Mother. He, during when he had he was able to give a talk during the session and about the missions, and he made some interesting statements. He said, "Let us not ask what are the missions, but let us ask where are the missions. It is souls, not territories, that make the missions. What God has joined together, the church and the mission, let no document separate." Bishop Sheen stated one of the greatest outcomes of the Second Vatican Council was that the whole effort prevailed and didn't fall apart, because at that time there was a lot of, I don't want to say attack, but a lot of challenge from a lot of secular viewpoints to change the church towards secular viewpoints. So when he came back from Vatican, he became the ordinary bishop of Rochester, New York. At the close of the council, Pope Paul asked what the church could do for Bishop Sheen, and he expressed his desire for a people of his own. So Pope Paul granted Bishop Sheen to be the ordinary bishop of Rochester, New York, and was installed in December of 1966. Most of the faithful welcomed Bishop Sheen enthusiastically. Now, I'd be enthusiastic if he became our bishop. However, Rochester was kind of a mixed success for Bishop Sheen. Rochester had a decaying inner city with an increase of the poor, and he took to that. He had visions of giving up a church property to help the poor, and he tried to offer St. Bridget's Church property for sale, but was thwarted by the parishioners. He actually never consulted the pastor of St. Bridget's, much to his dismay. So although there was a lot of contention between Bishop Sheen and Cardinal Spellman, because it's believed that the cardinal sort of banned Bishop Sheen and placed him in as Bishop of Rochester, sort of to get it out of his way, but that really apparently was not the case. So he tried to sell St. Bridget's to serve the poor. Now, although it sounded noble, this was thwarted by the parishioners and made Bishop Sheen realize the words of Judas. When Mary Magdalene poured the perfume over Jesus' feet and said, "The perfume could have been sold and mostly given to the poor." Ostensibly, it sounds like a good intention. However, Jesus said, "Let her have her lavish love. I will be here for only a short while. The poor you have with you always." So that was kind of a revelation, I guess, to the bishop. Now, ironically and interestingly, St. Bridget's in Rochester, New York, has since closed and merged with another parish. Can't fight with God. His death. His health started to fail in 1979. It was the year I graduated high school. He passed on December 9th, 1979, the day after the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So God honored his wish. He passed away very near one of the feasts of the Blessed Mother. He was buried in the crypt of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. Having previously had open heart surgery at Lenox Hill Hospital, he was buried in the crypt of St. Patrick's near the deceased archbishops of New York. The official repository of Sheen's papers, television programs, and other materials is at St. Bernard's School of Theology and Ministry in Rochester, New York. On October 2nd, 1979, 2 months before Sheen's death, Pope Paul II visited St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City and embraced Sheen, saying, "You have written and spoken well of the Lord Jesus Christ. You are a loyal son of the Church." And he was declared a venerable servant of God by Pope Benedict XVI on July 28th, 2012. That's the end of the talk, and I have 3 questions, and I didn't print them out. Will you return this fall? Will you find it in your heart to invite at least one person next fall? And lastly, will you discover how loved you are by God? Thank you.
Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata